As was said, I am one of 9 kids. This is my first family, the 9 of us growing up in Schoharie. And this is my second family, a company called MapInfo, which I created as a company right out of college. I don't know if anyone has ever done this before. Have you ever typed an address into a computer and seen a street map? Have you just done that? Has anyone done that? Pretty much most people. So we were the ones that invented that, and the company did very well. It, over the years, has grew to hundreds of millions in revenue, and it went public. When I was 29, I thought I had earned enough money to be able to retire for the rest of my life because of that IPO, and that was until last night when I tried to park here in Asbury Park in my hotel. My hotel charged me $25 for the parking, so I'm going to have to go back to work tomorrow. But I did in 2002, I was driving, as you do, my Porsche Boxster into my LA lake house, as you do, and I shut the car door, the garage door, and I let the car engine run. I let the carbon monoxide fill up the garage, and I closed my eyes and I leaned back in my driver's chair. And you ask, I'm just saying all this, what's the point of that is to say actually money actually doesn't get you very far in life. At that point I was at I didn't think very much of myself because I had failed at a few things. I had some successes in life, a string of successes, but I felt I was on a string of failures. And the person I loved didn't love me back. My mother had just died. I had been fired as a CEO from another company I'd founded. And things weren't looking up for me at the time. But after 3 minutes, after 5 minutes, I turned off the car engine, and I made the decision that if I was going to die, I'd rather do it for something than for a lack of something. So fortunately, it was December of 2002, and George Bush was just starting the invasion of Iraq. So I signed up for a war zone course for a journalist, as you do, and I bought a bulletproof vest, as you do, and I made my way to Amman, Jordan. Now, I snuck into Iraq. Well, I didn't sneak into Iraq. Does anyone know the International Press Association? Any show of hands there? So actually, those that didn't raise your hands, that was good because it actually doesn't exist. This is a show, a conference about identity, and actually all you need to establish an identity is a really good photo printer and some laminating plastic and some imagination. But I printed this up. It was good enough for the Jordanian Ministry of Information, and I got accredited as a war correspondent and was able to get past the military checkpoints. And I went into Iraq as a freelance journalist. And there I worked and I met my wife, Tish Durkin. I snuck into Iraq before the shock and awe campaign had kicked off the official part of the war. And this was actually super exciting to a kid from upstate New York because, the closest I'd gotten to gunfire in my life was watching Eric Estrada on the TV show Chips. Does anyone know that? So that was my introduction to the exciting wartime journalism world. And I was able to travel around Baghdad and Iraq in taxi cabs and buses, shooting photos and video for CNN and Reuters and actually, lots of other news magazines, etc. I met my wife there, as I said, and she's also here, up there on the balcony, past the interrogation lights. And she's a proper journalist. She knows what she's doing. I was a tourist. But you only had to walk out of your hotel room in Baghdad and you'd come across a story. So, but as a tourist and as a non-professional, the other journalists who were extremely courageous and sensible covered the story. They were on deadline, et cetera. I was there and just saying, hey, what's this about? I couldn't stand sitting on the sidelines when like a group of vigilantes would start to beat some looters or whatever. I'd step in and say, hey, calm down, guys, in my very, very pigeon-limited Arabic. So I wasn't really a journalist. I was more of a meddler. And eventually, I couldn't stand just what was going on in Iraq. I couldn't stand just sitting there and not doing something about it. So I started a humanitarian organization, and that humanitarian organization was called Jumpstart International. I added the international because, just to make it seem like it was bigger than it was. It was really just me. So I added the international. You should try this for yourselves, actually. Sean O'Sullivan, it's just a name, right? So Sean O'Sullivan, I could be a bum on the street or whatever, but Sean O'Sullivan International, hey, that's cool. Suddenly, I'm like, I have a corporate glass building, I've got a campus, I probably have a corporate jet. That's the thing that I was going for there with that. Anyway, Jumpstart started with the 30 of us in a warehouse, electricity warehouse in Baghdad, cleaning out these looted and burned places. And we worked up my Iraqi guide and journalist friend, Mohammed Al-Safar, became my co-founder in this organization. And we built it to about 3,500 people, working across up to 80 sites in Fallujah, Najaf, Baghdad at a time. And we cleaned out things like the National Library and the national museums and the colleges that had been destroyed and took down skyscrapers, et cetera. We had hundreds of pieces of heavy equipment, cranes and bulldozers and dump trucks and all of that we were operating with. So we did a lot of work, and it was important work. But it was also a hard time and a hard place to be doing that kind of work. And like all the places I've traveled in the world, the people in Iraq are great human beings, except for the gangsters and the terrorists, which, are sufficient to make life pretty miserable. In Iraq, there's a tremendous amount of human decency. But it is amazing how quickly, anyone in a war zone gets to adapt to these things, these changes, the explosions, the gunfire, snaking past people, teenagers with rocket launchers on their shoulders, and the checkpoints with everyone 10 times a day passing the checkpoints with AK-47s with kids and whatnot minding the checkpoints. But so we dealt with those things, but these are not things that you here in the United States and me coming from the United States are used to in our everyday lives. These are not things that we normally experience. There was good that came out of it. Thousands of people in our organization did meaningful work. Hundreds became leaders, and some order was restored. As for me, I met my wife, Tish, and we were set to be married on New Year's Eve here in New Jersey. Actually, she came from New Jersey, with my co-founder, Mohammed Al-Safar, as my best man. Now, Mohammed was actually assassinated before that could happen. We were running. Sorry, I'm a little dry. We were running the largest humanitarian organization in Iraq, and they'd already blown up the Red Cross, they've blown up the United Nations, they blew up lots of places, and they targeted our organization as well. And so Mohamed, he was also engaged to be married, and unfortunately he didn't live to see his wedding day. But amid all the rubble and the carnage, I now recognize another piece of my own identity. Ever since elementary school in the United States, I had taken for granted what we have here as a civil society in the United States. I had known no other thing. I think most of you have grown up with this all around us, with this civil society surrounding us. What is a civil society? It's everything. It's for everything from the schools and the firehouses and the libraries and the hospitals, all driven by people who are principled people, building things for the community. It's events like this. It's 1,000 points of life. It's what's called, it takes a village, Hillary Clinton calls it. It's organizations founded and run by people not for the economic benefit, but for the quality of life. But in Iraq, where civil society had disappeared, where law and order had disappeared, where human decency was on the run, I became far more aware of the power and the necessity of community and the fundamental essentials of morals and ethics and honesty and trustworthiness as part of our society. These are all things we take for granted. In Iraq, the assumption of the people eventually became that all government and everyone was corrupt and incapable. It's a paralyzing assumption. And it was worse than a mixture of, say, the Sopranos and, Real Housewives of New Jersey's or the House of Cards. It's nearly as horrifying as the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So, against the background of the ruins, I got married to Tish, and my sister Rez served as the best man. And 9 months and 7 days later, I should say, not the other way around, 9 days and 7 months later. 9 months and 7 days later, my daughter Charlotte was born, and she's here today in the audience as well. So, Jumpstart kept operating, but after my wife became pregnant, I stopped going back to war zones. But I carry those lessons that I took from Iraq with me. I believe in the role of the principled individuals as the bedrock for our communities. On coming back to the United States and to the West in general, I find myself dumbfounded by how little we appreciate what we have and how readily we mistake people who are famous and come from wealth or come from power for people of character and people of purpose and people of meaning. And it's the latter part, that latter group, not the former, that we depend on for our way of life. It's for my children that I fear. In America, we're not going to have the kind of cataclysmic failure that Syria is facing today, that civil war brings. But we face the continuous erosion of the unprincipled leadership and a never-ending self-centered, chase the money at all costs focus that I think doesn't lead to a civil society, frankly. In the absence of a civil society, the gangsters and the thieves win. In a society, in a world where people are amoral, everyone loses. I'm very grateful for what we have. The chances that I've been personally given as a kid growing up with my family on the welfare system in upstate New York for 6.5 years, I had a chance, and our forefathers developed this chance for all of us and progressed this beautiful gift, this society that we have, that we share today, that we have to appreciate today. Although it's not perfect, it's never equal, it's never, it's not the end all. It's not good enough, but it's a good enough start. And it's an opportunity set for all of us that's rich enough that if we seize it and move it forward, we can actually make it better over time. So I'll end this shortly. Coming from Iraq, I have a different perspective on what we must do and how, with this opportunity that life gives us. It isn't an accident that suffering artists often produce the greatest works. We actually grow most when we're stretched. We all seek to live lives of meaning and purpose. We must stretch to do that. It's our duty to do more than what's just enough to keep things going. It's our job in life to climb mountains and to speak truth to power and to build meaningful and trustworthy communities. This is part of my identity. I think this is all part of your identity. I think this is the identity that we have developed for America. I thank you very much.